We can speak to the Shadow Work and Pension Secretary, Jonathan Ashworth, who is talking to us from central London. Good to have you on the programme this morning. So do you back the government's plan on small boats?
Well, we've not seen the actual legislation. We'll study it carefully. We'll want to see whether there are clear plans to tackle the gangs who are smuggling people illegally across the Channel and completely abusing people. We were told in the past that they've got plans and legislation that was going to deal with this problem, and their promises came to nothing. And actually, we've seen more boat crossings and the criminal gangs getting away with more and more. So we'll study it carefully. We'll also look to see whether this will actually deal with the backlog in processing asylum cases. And it's of course because of that huge backlog that the criminal gangs are able to exploit the situation. Now, the government have been in power now for 12, 13 years. They've allowed this backlog to build up. So we'll look at it carefully. We'll see if it actually practically deals with the existing problems in the system. But I have to say, we have heard these promises before from Conservative politicians.
You're absolutely right, of course, to highlight the huge backlog in processing asylum claims, which has a big knock-on effect. But just in principle, Chris Heaton-Harris said that it's going to be black and white, very simple, very clear. Do you support the idea that you should be banned from claiming asylum in the UK if you enter here illegally?
Well, again, we've not seen the actual legislation. We see Conservative ministers making big promises all the time to get headlines.
Just to come in, if I may, because I do understand that you haven't seen the legislation, you want to have a look at the detail, but I'm just asking you about the broad principle.
Well, the broad principle is that refugees who arrive in this country, we have always welcomed them. People whose asylum applications have been turned down, then of course they should be returned. That is a principle that we have always accepted. The problem is, of course, the Conservatives will come out here and they will get headlines and they will say they're going to do this, that and the other, but they never deliver, do they? We were told last year that their borders bill was going to deal with this. It didn't. So we will study it carefully, but we'll also want to see whether they're going to crack down on those illegal people smuggling gangs, whether they're going to deal with the asylum backlog, because so far they have manifestly failed on that front.
You say that Labour's position is that refugees should be welcomed. And of course, many people who come to the UK on small boats are doing so because they're desperate, right? They are fleeing persecution. There may not be any other way for them to get to the UK and to put in an asylum claim. Many of those claims are then granted. So if you do hold that position that refugees are welcome, surely you should be opposing this plan.
No, right. There should be safe routes for refugees. The country opened its doors up to people from Ukraine, from Afghanistan, for example. But where people traffickers are exploiting this system and people's asylum case is turned down, then those people obviously have to be returned. Now, the government keep telling us they're going to deal with this problem, but they never do. So we'll study the details of this bill when we actually see it, and we'll test it. We'll hold the government to account. But I've got to say, they keep making these promises. They've been making these promises for 18 months, 2 years or so, and they never deliver.
What's Labour's plan?
Well, Yvette Cooper has outlined a plan. We would invest in a proper crime agency to really crack down on these people smuggling gangs. We will deal with the backlog in asylum claims, because that backlog, where people can go for months and months and months and months and months, sometimes beyond 12 months, the gangs are exploiting that, aren't they? So we've outlined a plan to deal with the problems in the system, and we will test this legislation on whether we believe it will deal with the actual problems that we've been highlighting.
OK. I want to talk to you a little bit about Sue Gray. The very heart of the civil service is its reputation for impartiality, for serving and working for the government of the day, whoever it is elected by the British people. How do you think it looks when a very senior civil servant quits to become Chief of Staff for the leader of the Labour Party?
Well, Sue Gray is a woman of exceptional talent, abilities, incredibly high calibre. And in the same way in which senior business people are now supporting the Labour Party, in the same way we have a new crop of candidates of high calibre, I think it shows how seriously people are taking the prospect of Keir Starmer as Prime Minister and a Labour government. And in turn, in making this appointment, I think it reveals how seriously Keir Starmer is taking our preparations for government should the British people put their trust in us at the next general election. She's a woman of immense integrity, and I am delighted she's hopefully coming to work for the Labour Party.
I guess my question is more about the impression that it gives, particularly for those people who may believe, rightly or wrongly, that the civil service is effectively biased against the Conservative Party. In addition, the Privileges Committee is looking into Boris Johnson, whether he misled Parliament over Partygate. Sue Gray, of course, was the person who presided over that inquiry. Has Labour just handed Boris Johnson and his allies the best ever get-out-of-jail-free card? They're already saying that, look, you can't trust anything that anyone says on Partygate because it was all a political smear. Look, Sue Gray, she's now working for Labour.
No, not remotely. Remember, Boris Johnson said that Sue Gray's report validated him. And in fact, the committee looking into Boris Johnson's rule breaking at the time when his Conservative government had put the country into lockdown was a committee set up unanimously by the whole of the House of Commons, has a majority of Conservative members of Parliament on that committee, and has taken witness statements under oath, has relied on WhatsApp messages, on emails from witnesses. Actually, it's not relying on the Sue Gray report because she wasn't a witness to these parties. It was staff in number 10, many of whom, have I said, given evidence to this committee. And this committee found out or reported on Friday that they believes there is a case that Boris Johnson may well have misled Parliament. So I know Boris Johnson's been on the TV sort of trying to say that, look, this brings the committee into question. It most certainly doesn't. We've seen the photos. They're not photoshopped. Boris Johnson is there breaking the rules when he put the country into lockdown.
OK, well, we'll find out what the Privileges Committee has to say later on, of course. I'm really interested to get your view as well on the other story that's been dominating the news for the last couple of weeks, Matt Hancock's WhatsApp messages. While he was Health Secretary, of course, during the COVID-19 pandemic, you were shadowing him at the time. I think in the Sunday Telegraph today, we can see that he says he wanted to frighten the pants of the public with the Kent variant to try and improve compliance with the legislation and the rules. What's your reaction to seeing all of this play out?
I mean, I think so many of these messages are so troubling, aren't they? And I think in the end, it reinforces the case for a proper, full inquiry, and we've got to get it's got to get on. We've got to get on with this public inquiry. I mean, other countries have completed their inquiry. We need at least some form of preliminary report by the end of the year. All of this material has to be handed over, and I hope Rishi Sunak is insisting that all of this material from any minister is handed over completely, and I hope none ministers are deleting WhatsApps or anything of that nature. I think it also reveals that, or confirms that, many of the concerns that we raised throughout the pandemic, the failure to put a protective ring around care homes, the concerns that we had in Leicester where we were in a longer lockdown, that it turns out that Rishi Sunak's policies were actually helping spread the virus, which kept us in Leicester and people in Bury and Bolton and Bradford in longer lockdowns because of Rishi Sunak. It confirms that there's a whole host of mistakes were made that we were raising at the time. So we really do need a full inquiry, and the inquiry, we need to get on with it. Rishi Sunak should get a grip of this and insist that we have some form of report by the end of the year.
You say that you're hoping Conservative ministers aren't deleting their own WhatsApps. How about your WhatsApps? Is there anything incriminating in those? Would you be happy to hand them over?
There's nothing incriminating in my WhatsApps, but obviously if anybody wanted me to cooperate with an inquiry, of course I would, but I wasn't in the government, I wasn't making decisions.
Have you got any with Matt Hancock?
I have. Matt Hancock did WhatsApp me from time to time, but nothing as interesting as what we've seen so far, I'm afraid.
Anything you want to get out before it appears in the Telegraph?
No.
OK.
I don't think there's anything interesting there.
All right, thank you very much indeed. Jonathan Ashworth speaking to us there.